A promise was made, the prophets of old. From David's throne, a Savior foretold. The Word became flesh, God's only Son. Light of the world, the righteous one.
Okay. Y'all ready? Back in church, ready for science class? Didn't know you'd be coming to church for science class, did you?
Christian Science.
Christian Science. No, not quite that one. But we are Christians, and we're going to talk about science.
Christian in science, but not together.
Right. Christian Science, but not Christian Science. That's
right.
Yeah. We are Christians. We will be talking about science a little bit. We're going to have to, kind of give a little bit of that because we're talking about the doctrine of God. Of course, make sure my equipment is working properly. And in our overall doctrine of God, we're talking about the question, does God exist? Of course, I'm ripping material off from True You. I have those DVDs. If anybody would actually like to watch the DVDs, Stephen Meyer, Dr. Stephen Meyer is amazing. He does a really good job of presenting it. He's actually a scientist, and so he knows what he's talking about. And as we are doing this, as we're going through, we're examining evidence, and then we're trying to figure out, okay, which worldview is supported by this evidence, right? And we give our four main worldviews: theism, deism, naturalism, which says, that nature, matter, physical world is all that exists, and then pantheism, which says that God is part of nature. That nature is God and God is nature, kind of like the Force in Star Wars kind of a deal. And we're judging which one of these is best supported by the evidence. And last time we were talking about how the universe is finite. Right? We talked about the evidence that there was an actual beginning to the universe. That we know that it is expanding. And if it is expanding, then that means at one point it was back to nothing. If you trace the timeline back, you get to a definite finite beginning point in time. And atheist scientists don't like this because that means that there has to be a beginning, which means there is a beginner. And that points to something outside of space and time, and they don't like that. So they came up with a few theories to try to get around this beginning of the universe. And so we'll talk about those briefly, and then we're going to get into what's called the fine-tuning of the universe. Kind of like, you want an instrument to be finely tuned so it plays just nicely. Well, the universe is finely tuned for life to exist. And so we'll get into that. But a couple of the challenges to the finite universe. What's called the steady state model. You don't have to remember these. There won't be a test. Maybe a pop quiz. We'll see. There was a guy named Hoyle, Sir Fred Hoyle, Dr. Fred Hoyle. And he came up with this idea of the steady state. And what it says is that matter is continuously being created. So he's saying, okay, look, the universe is expanding, but the density remains the same, which means that there's always new matter constantly being created, so that the universe it's expanding, but it's always been expanding, and it's just that there's new stuff being created, which sounds a little odd. So what we have going on now is a comparison of ideas. Okay, so we have an expanding universe. And one model, we'll call it the Big Bang. I know Big Bang's not popular among church folk, but just saying that there was a beginning, a bang, doesn't necessarily mean when it happened. There's the Big Bang, the moment when it happened, and then there's the theory of the Big Bang that involves all of the billions of years and all that. We're kind of splitting between the two. We can talk about ages some other time. But now we have, the beginning, universe is expanding. Well, in his theory, the universe is expanding. And someone said, how can we test this? And they said, wait a minute, if there was a Big Bang, if there was a beginning, there would have been a massive amount of radiation and energy that was given off at that first event of expansion. And so that radiation, that energy, should kind of, fade out, spread out as the universe is expanding. Then you would kind of have this kind of residual radiation in the background if the finite universe was the reality. Whereas if steady state was real, there wouldn't be any background radiation. So that was the theory. And at the time, they didn't have any way to test it. But years later, you get these two guys, Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias. They are listening. They're doing something else. They're working for Bell Labs. They're not looking for the beginning of the universe. They're not in cosmology. They're not even trying to answer this question. But they have this radio telescope of theirs, and they keep getting this weird interference. And they try to figure out what it is. Well, maybe it's birds. No, there's no birds in our antenna. Maybe it's the traffic. Maybe it's power lines. Maybe it's radio or something. But they eliminate all their possibilities, and they're thinking, well, what is making this interference? And then they remembered, hey, wait a minute. There was something we read about a guy talking about some background radiation in the universe. And so they talked to the guy who came up with that. I forget his name at the moment. And they got together, and sure enough, they measured it, and hey, that's what it is. And no matter which way they pointed their telescope, pointed their radio wave, their receiver, it was this background hum in every direction, everywhere they looked. And so we found the background radiation, which proved the steady state was a bust. That one is not the answer. So what people said was the oscillating universe. This is the idea that, yes, right now it's expanding, but then one day it's going to retract and collapse back in on itself, and it'll have another big bang, and it'll expand, and then it'll pull back in and contract on itself, and that there's this cycle of over and over and over again of oscillations, this cycle of expansion, retraction. And so, yes, right now it looks like there was a beginning, but not really. It's just this cycle. People said, okay, well, how can we test that one? And they really could make some measurements to do that. There's two major problems with this theory that puts it to rest. One is there's not enough mass. Okay, gravity. You all know how gravity works, right? When you drop something, it actually falls to the ground. Gravity is done by mass. Kind of the easiest way to explain it is if you imagine a trampoline. Any of y'all have like a trampoline for grandkids or anything? Or have ever had a trampoline or know what a trampoline is? What happens if you put a bowling ball on a trampoline? Right? It just kind of sinks down and everything kind of goes towards it. Well, that's what gravity is. And so the heavier an object is, the more it draws things to it. So if you put a bunch of marbles out on a trampoline, they'll just sit there because they're not very heavy. But then you put that bowling ball on there, everything's going to run towards the bowling ball. Well, that's how gravity works, based on mass. Well, they estimate the mass of objects, stars and galaxies and everything in the universe, and there's not nearly enough to kind of make it all pull back together. So it's expanding, and they think, okay, we have to have this gravity to pull it back together, but there's not enough mass to pull it together. Plus, you have the expansion is overpowering the gravitation. So it's like the idea is there's an explosion, but eventually it'll slow down and come back together. Problem is, it's not slowing down. The expansion of the universe is actually getting faster. So it's not slowing down, and there's not enough gravity to slow it down. And so the oscillating theory is a bust as well. And so we are stuck with the evidence for God of a finite universe. So any questions on those two things? No? All right. Creation from nothing. That's what we're looking at. If there's a beginning, it's an absolute beginning, then there had to be a creation. Well, what was before stuff? There was nothing before there was something. Right? Where did the something come from? That's really the question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything at all exist? And the idea, theological idea, is called creatio ex nihilo. Right? Creation out of nothing. That's just Latin. Right? Creation out of nothing. So there was nothing physical, nothing material that existed, and God just made it out of nothing by the power of His Word. And so that's really what we're seeing going on with this finite universe. Well then, years later, this guy comes along. I don't know, you may have heard of him. His name is Dr. Stephen Hawking. He is a world-famous astrophysicist. He is a miracle in himself. He has, I forget what his condition is, but it's one that doctors say he should not have lived. And now he's an old man. But he's the scientist. You may have seen him on TV or something where he's in the wheelchair and he can't move, and he's got the little thing where he has to speak with a voice synthesizer where he types on a keyboard and it speaks for him. That's him. Brilliant, brilliant man. And he discovered this curvature of space-time. You ever heard the phrase that space is curved? Well, he's the one that figured that out. Well, here's the thing, though. If space is expanding, that means at one time it retracted back. Well, the smaller and smaller it gets, the tighter and tighter that curve gets, you get down to a certain point to where you have zero volume. Right? So everything's getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until finally you get to a point where the universe is so curved in on itself, there is no volume, no space for it to hold anything. He's the one that discovered that. And he is not a theist, he's not a believer, but he is the one that discovered that you get down to a point of the universe where there is nothing. And that's what the Bible says. Creation out of nothing. In the beginning, God created. This guy, Arno Penzias, we mentioned him a while ago with the background radiation. This is what he said, and also not a Christian. Says, the best data that we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. So here's a non-Christian scientist saying, you know what, if all I had was the Bible and I had to predict a scientific theory, this is what I would come up with, and this is what the evidence shows. And so there we see the science bearing out this idea of a definite beginning of the universe, which backs up creation. So, any thoughts, questions, comments, anything on that? Yes, he is an atheist. Yeah, he. I don't know if I'd use the word hostile towards religion, but he is definitely not a fan of religion. And so, yeah, he is not an advocate of the Bible by any stretch of the imagination. So it's always fun whenever these guys who don't like religion are discovering the evidence that backs up the Bible. So that way it's not just us Christians over here making things up on our own. We can actually point to data from actual science. Fine-tuning of the universe. That's what we're going to talk about. Let me grab a little something here. I've got a visual aid. Fine-tuning of the universe for life. Life exists. If things were not specifically the way they are, life could not exist. There's a couple different ways that we can talk about being fine-tuned. We have what's called the Goldilocks Zone. Okay? Not too hot, not too cold. That's the Earth. That's where we sit. Perfect position. If we were any further away, be too cold. Life couldn't live. If we were any closer to the sun, we all burn up. Life couldn't survive on the Earth. If the rate of spin, if it was faster or slower, wouldn't work. The angle of the tilt that we have that allows us to have our seasons, that helps the balance of life so that we can exist. The size and distance of the moon. Right? Y'all know what the moon does, how it causes the tides as it goes around. If it were bigger or if it were closer, it would cause tidal waves. Right? With the tide coming in wouldn't be a nice gentle wash in and out. It would be just tsunamis covering the earth. Or if it was too far away, then you wouldn't have the tides. That actually, the tides going kind of sloshes the ocean so they don't get stagnant. Because, if water just sits there, we all know what happens to it. It gets nasty and things can't live in it. The tides actually allows life to happen. You have Jupiter. Right, big old gaseous giant planet out there. Jupiter is actually like the vacuum cleaner of the solar system. It's in just the right position that its gravity pulls in all of the debris, meteors, asteroids, comets kind of stuff, so they don't make it to the inner solar system where the Earth is. The moon actually does much the same thing to a smaller degree as it circles the Earth. And so this allows, if it wasn't for Jupiter, we'd be getting pelted with asteroids and meteors. You have the position that we are in the galaxy. If you were to look, I meant to get a map, but if you were to look at where we are in the galaxy, we're out towards the edge. you've ever seen a picture of the Milky Way, it's got those spiral arms coming out. We're on the edge of one of those arms towards the outer edge of the galaxy. If we were closer in the middle, the stars around us would be too close to us. We would just be bombarded by radiation. Life wouldn't be able to exist. And so you have all of these different things where we're in just the right spot for life to exist on this planet. And that is just amazing, I think. But more than that, we have probabilities from nature. You know how probabilities work? Right? The probability that something's going to happen. I meant to get a lock, use it as an example. Combination lock. You know, a little tumbler kind. You say you got 3 numbers with 40 different choices. 40 times 40 times 40, that's the way you figure out probability, is 1 in 64,000. 1 in 64,000. Which means that if I were to just hand you a combination lock, you would have a 1 out of 64,000 probability that you would find the right combination by trying it, right? So I mean that's for if you were to just pick up a lock, right, and just spin it first try, click, it pops open. Wow, that is just really lucky. If you're standing there and someone just picks a random lock up off the ground, turns it, and opens it, you're gonna go, wait a minute, you must have known what that was, right? You're gonna be a little skeptical about the chance of that because 1 in 64,000? No, there might be something else going on here. Well, we got some bigger probabilities. How about a royal flush? I know we're Baptists, so I won't embarrass you by asking if anybody plays poker. What?
Royal flush in the toilet.
Royal flush. Yeah, talking about a different royal flush. A different one, right? Y'all know what a royal flush is? Maybe heard about it, right? You just heard about it. You've seen that movie Maverick with Mel Gibson. That's what it was. Royal flush is the highest hand in poker you can get. It's a straight, right? A run of 5 cards in a row that are in order. It's a flush, so it's all the same suit, and it's the top 5 highest cards in the deck. Ace, king, queen, jack, 10, or 10, jack, king, queen, ace. However you want to read that. The probability of a royal flush is 1 in 649,740. So if I were to just pick up a deck of cards and deal out the top 5 and boom, it's a royal flush, what are you going to think? Oh, well, yeah, you stacked deck. You had that planned. That was right there. Right? Actually, the chances of getting a royal flush, based on this probability, if you were to be dealt 20 hands a night, every night, for 365 days a year, it would take you 89 years to get a royal flush. That's the probabilities we're looking at there. So royal flush, very difficult, right? So if you're playing poker and someone comes up with a royal flush, first off, why are you playing poker? Gambling's a sin. But if you're playing poker and someone comes up with a royal flush, you go, wow, that is amazing. Deal out the next hand. Royal flush again. Hold on a second. Well, no. There's no chance you got that 2 in a row. They do it again. 3 royal flushes in a row. What are you thinking? Somebody's cheating. No. This doesn't happen, right? The probabilities. Look at that probability. No way this happens. Here's the thing, though. When it comes to physics and the probabilities needed for life to exist, it makes a royal flush look like nothing. Here's a quote by Cambridge University professor M.J. Rees. By the way, Cambridge, you all know, familiar with that. It's over there in Britain. It's where they grow smart people, right? Cambridge. You don't graduate from Cambridge without having some intelligence, much less teach there without knowing what you're talking about. And he says, the possibility of life as we know it depends on the values of a few basic physical constants and is, in some respects, remarkably sensitive to their numerical values. Nature does exhibit remarkable coincidences. Well, he's saying coincidence, but we know different, right? Not coincidence, it's God did it. It's been said before that kind of imagine we all climb into a spaceship and we fly out in the universe and we find the control room for the universe. right? And we go in and we find the control room with all these dials and everything, and they're all set just the right way. And if we were to walk up and just go, I wonder what this does, and we turn the dial a little bit, and all of a sudden the whole universe just collapses and falls apart because we adjusted a dial. That's what it's like. There are all these forces and all of these things going on in nature, in the universe, that are set just the right way, that if they were even just a hair stronger or weaker, it wouldn't work. Gravity, for instance. Gravity is a specific force. It's a constant throughout the universe. It is a particular measurement in physics. And if it were just a little bit stronger or a little bit weaker, nothing would hold together. The solar system wouldn't be working right. The galaxies wouldn't be working. It wouldn't work. You also have what's called the cosmological constant. That's the number, the force that represents the expansion. If we're expanding too fast, nothing would hold together. If we're expanding too slow, it would all collapse in on itself. But it's set just right for the universe to function properly. Right? So the question is, why are the dials finely tuned? See, this is something that scientists, not just Christians, not just people who believe in God, but atheist scientists make these measurements and they go, wow, everything seems to be set up just the way it needs to be. You have Sir Fred Hoyle, right? We talked about him. This was the steady state guy. He does not like the idea of a beginning. He is not friendly to the idea of God. And he says that a common sense interpretation of the data suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. So he's even looking at the data going, wow, a common sense view says that somebody set this up. Here you have an astronomer, George Greenstein. He says, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather agency with a capital A, must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? These are scientists. These ain't preachers talking. These are scientists. Okay? And they're talking about this because the universe is finely tuned. Right? If it was expanding any faster, then there would be no structure in the universe. It'd all fall apart. If it were going slower, it wouldn't work. We look around and we see all of this finely tuned, specific information. Everything set just the way it needs to be. And what is it we think? That it happened by chance? No, we look and we go, oh, someone made it this way. So why is it that we assume design? Why do we infer? Why do we look at something and think, hey, that was designed? Well, there's two things that are necessary for us to look at something and think, oh, that was designed. Someone designed that. One, high improbability. Right? If we look at something and go, wow, look at the odds of that. But not just high improbability, but also that there's a pattern, right? That there's something functional about it. That it actually serves a purpose, some goal-directedness. So, for instance, you'll recognize that? Yeah? Anyone ever actually been there? You actually seen it? Yeah? I haven't. That's a funny looking mountain. How do you figure that mountain got that way?
Lots of dynamite.
Yeah, it wasn't wind and erosion, right, doing that?
Just happened.
All by itself, it just happened.
The Big Bang happened.
Right? Well, here's the deal. You look up there and you say, hey, that is a very highly improbable structure. Okay, well, but the rocks around it are highly improbable as well. I mean, what are the chances that this cliff face over here is going to have exactly those same grooves and everything? That's pretty highly improbable. But what does that have that the other rocks don't? There's a pattern. There's function. There's a goal. There's a purpose. It's to look like the presidents. Right? And so we see something like that and we think, oh, that was designed. If you had never even heard of Mount Rushmore, right? Let's say, we have It's like one of those bad sci-fi movies where civilization collapses and we're actually a generation or two away from everything and we haven't studied history and we just come across this mountain. You're going to look and go, wow, someone did that, right? Because you see the improbability and you see the pattern and you realize someone had to have done that. And this is what archaeologists do. Archaeologists digging in the ground, how do they know a pointy rock from an arrowhead? How do they know the difference? Because one has specific purpose, functionality in its shape, in its design. So they look and they say, hey, that's design. We do this all the time. You do this all day long without even realizing it. You see the pattern, you see the functionality, you recognize design. However, not everybody wants to believe in the design, because what must you have if you have design? A designer, right? They don't want to believe in the designer, so they're, no, let's look for other reasons. Other reasons. We don't want to believe this. So you have what's called the weak anthropic principle. The fact that this is even given a name and considered... Okay, this is basically what it says. We should not be surprised that we live in a universe in which the conditions are necessary for our existence are present. Basically, they're saying, of course the conditions are right for us to live here, because we're here. We should expect them to be right for us to live because we're alive. What's the problem with that? Does it actually answer the question? No, not at all. It just simply says it is what it is. Well, okay, I mean, I guess if that's what kind of gets you by, but that doesn't answer any questions. Let's say, for instance, you're an insurance adjuster. You're an insurance, agent. You're the guy person who goes in there and examines the situation to determine a fire. Well, let's say a house caught fire and you want to go determine the cause for insurance purposes. You go in, you look around, you come out and go, I know what it was. It was the oxygen in the air. It's what caused the fire. Oxygen in the atmosphere. Because oxygen is necessary for fire, right? What does that get you anything? No, it doesn't answer the question. Of course oxygen is needed. That's not the point. It's not the question. What started it going? And so the weak anthropic principle has some problems. It does not explain why these conditions are so improbable. It doesn't explain. It confuses a necessary condition with a cause. Say the necessary condition. These things have to be in place in order for us to live. And they go, oh, well, that's the way they are because, well, they needed to be. That doesn't explain. That's not a cause. Remember, we're looking for a cause. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why are things the way they are? And this basically says, because they are. That is not an answer. Now, this is the one that is actually gaining in popularity. I don't get it, but sure. The many worlds hypothesis, or the multiverse. This is the idea that many other universes may exist, and if there are other universes that exist, then we can explain our universe just kind of like winning the lottery. So let's imagine there is some universe-making machine out there, beyond, our universe, and it's just cranking out universes, right? Or I've seen it described like soap bubbles just forming. So it's like all these little bubbles of universes forming. Millions upon trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of universes. Possibly an infinite number of universes. Well, so of course one of them's finally going to come along that has the right conditions for life. That's what they argue. That there's all these trillions and trillions, maybe even infinite universes. So the fact that ours is one that can support life, that's nothing special. We just won the lotto. That's all that is. The problem with that is there's not actually any evidence for it at all. It's pure, total speculation. It's just something they thought up as a maybe. But do you also see where the problem is? So let's say there's multiple universes. What's the next question? Where'd they come from? All they did was back the question up a step. Okay, so multiple universes. Where did that universe-making machine come from? And by the way, in order to make all these universes, it would have to be finely tuned as well. Who did that? All they've done is just kick the ball down the, kick the can down the street a little bit. They didn't actually answer anything. And so there was an article in, I think it was the London Times, and this is what it kind of had to say, talking about this fine-tuning, about the way everything is perfectly lined up for life to exist. It says, no such argument can ever be absolutely conclusive. And in science, you can't, as much as people like to talk about scientific fact, in science you just get really, really close to, making a lot of sense. You never really get exact 100% yes, we're absolutely sure we know for a fact. At least not in theoretical science, astrophysics, that sort of thing. It says, no such argument can ever be absolutely conclusive, and the anthropic fine-tuning argument stops just short of knockdown proof. For there could have been millions and millions of different universes created, each with different settings of the fundamental ratios and constants. So many, in fact, that one with the right set was eventually bound to turn up by sheer chance, and we just happened to be the lucky ones. But there is no evidence for such a theory whatsoever. No evidence. They just made it up. On the other hand, the evidence for the truth of the fine-tuning argument is of such an order of certainty that in any other sphere of science we would regard it as absolutely settled. To insist otherwise is like insisting that Shakespeare was not written by Shakespeare, because it might have been written by billions of monkeys sitting at billions of keyboards over billions of years. But so it might. But the sight of the scientific atheist clutching at such desperate straws has put new spring in the step of the theists. For the first time in more than 100 years, they no longer feel the need to apologize for their beliefs. Perhaps now they should apologize for their previous apologies. And so he's saying, okay, yeah, maybe it was billions and billions and billions and billions, but there's no evidence. But the evidence for the beginning and for a fine-tuning, for a design, is so overwhelming. If it were any other field of science, if it was anything besides proof of God, it'd just be widely accepted. But it's not. Because there's philosophical and spiritual reasons they don't want it to be the case. Last time we read several quotes from scientists who were saying, no, I cannot accept it. I know this is where it looks like it's leading, but I will not accept that conclusion. And so here we are. We have the evidence. We have the beginning. We have the fine-tuning. It's there. So we have our worldviews that we are comparing which ones match up with the evidence. And we've come much to the same conclusion today as we did last time, that pantheism and naturalism cannot provide an explanation for the evidence. There had to be a beginning, and if there is a beginning, in naturalism, what began it? There's nothing outside the universe to begin the universe. There's nothing outside the universe to design the universe. Same thing with pantheism. God can't be the designer. He's part of the system. So he couldn't have designed the system. He is the system. And so we see those two are knocked out of the running. That leaves us with theism and deism. And we'll get into more as we go to explain why it's actually more likely theism, an active, involved God, rather than deism, which is God just created the world and let it go. Disinterested, not involved. And so, what's interesting though, what we see in this evidence is what is needed, what is demanded by this evidence is a creator who transcends matter and time and space and energy. Okay, so the universe, the relationship between space, time, and matter is such that they're all three needed, coexistent. So whatever it is that created the universe must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Who does that sound like? And because of the design, the intricate physics and the design of all the constants and forces in nature requires that it be an intelligent creator. Highly intelligent. Might we say omniscient, all-knowing? And so here we see that the science is not only showing that there is a creator, but the necessary attributes of the creator is describing the God of the Bible. And so we'll get into some more next week. We've been looking big, right? We've been looking out at the stars. Next week we're going to actually go down in and look in the cell, get into some DNA and that sort of thing. But any questions on any of this?
There's so much evidence there is a creator.
Yeah.
What would it take for some of these guys to go, oh, man, I'm wrong, there is definitely.
There's been a lot who have. I mean,
Walked over.
yeah, I mean, there's been some that just, after a while, like some of these guys that we quoted that are saying, wow, you look at this evidence and you have to, only conclude that maybe there was some super intellect. A lot of these guys that are saying that, they're saying it at the end of their life, after decades of denying and looking for other reasons and explanations. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they, flipped the card and, accepted Christ and bought in wholesale, but, after decades and decades of looking and looking and looking and looking for some other explanation, at the end of their life, a lot of times they just scratch their head and go, you know what?
That's our revival right there.
Yeah.
Some of these guys would admit that there is a God.
Well, and there actually is a little bit of a revival, a renaissance taking place in academia, among scientists, among historians and philosophers that are looking at this stuff and saying, hey, However, remember we talked about the first week, the Darwin-only club is very powerful. Anything that would undermine that tends to be kind of pushed out to the fringes. Have y'all seen the movie Expelled? That Ben Stein, is that his name? Ben? That he did. It's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And it documents how in academia, in science, in scientific journals, anything that is friendly to creation or intelligent design is not allowed. Because that's not science. That's not really science. So we can't have you here. Like, I can't remember his name. We'll have to watch the movie sometime. He was I don't know the head of, but he was high up in the Smithsonian. And he allowed an article to be published. He himself didn't actually put forth any ideas, but he allowed an article to be published that was friendly to intelligent design. And he got pushed out. You have all kinds of cases of professors being denied tenure because it comes out, to the university that they have theistic or creationist leanings. It's not allowed. A respectable scientific journal is not going to publish an article that has to do with creation or intelligent design, because then they won't be respectable anymore. So the anti-God culture among science is pretty strong, but there's some cracks in the armor.
Maybe that's why God's keeping Hawkins alive this long. So that he will
Maybe so.
accept that there is a God and fight.
Yeah.
The nation would.
Pray for that one, because I know a lot of people that would stop in their tracks and go, "What? Wait a minute, huh?" Because he's a rock star among the scientific atheist community, and so that'd be a good one. You can pray for that one. And so, yeah, had somewhere I was going to go with that. Don't remember. But there's chinks in the armor. There's cracks in the wall that are forming. On the evolution front, because we have all this that we looked at, where fine-tuning and all of this, we mentioned the new atheists, Dawkins, and one guy in particular, Christopher Hitchens, militant, hated God, hated anything to do with religion. But he himself admitted that the fine-tuning argument is one of the strongest arguments for God. You look at the evidence and it's like, wow, okay, that very well may be. But he didn't want to believe it, so he wouldn't have anyway. But you have all of this going on. You have a little bit of a renaissance in philosophy. You have on the biology front with evolution, cracks starting to form there. Where here it's been 150 years, and you have scientists that are starting to look and go, hey, this isn't adding up. I mean, as much as it's in the textbooks and it's just hammered and hammered and hammered from such a young age, in the scientific literature, there's scientists that are scratching their head and saying, hey guys, this isn't adding up. Maybe we need to look at something else because this isn't working. And so, but they're not going to let you know about that. They're going to keep that under wraps and keep the strong face to the...
They have to rewrite the textbooks.
Yeah, they would. Well, they already should. There's a lot of stuff in there that, we know is wrong. It's like, even if you believe evolution, these things are wrong, but they're still in the textbooks. And so, but that's a whole other lesson. We'll get into that. So, all right. Anything else? Okay, then. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you as we have looked at the evidence for your existence, for this wonderful creation that you have. God, that it is so marvelous and so wonderful. Your word says that the heavens declare your glory. And as we look at the exquisite detail and the intricate design that you have given in your universe, we can only stand in awe and wonder. God, let us make this a part of who we are. Let us to understand this. God, I pray for those who work in these fields that they can understand it, they can be convicted of it. Yeah, I just pray that you can help us to know and to be able to speak truth to those around us. That not only do you exist, but that you love us and your grace and your mercy is available. In Jesus' name, amen.
While we were sinners, Christ died for us.